Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today I'm going to be wrapping this card up. What's this? Gonna go somewhere. So yeah, this is the VEGA 64, and for some reason people really want to see me dress up a GPU, because that's what I do when I do thermal insulation. So let's get kind of into it, and first sort of the reasoning behind doing thermal insulation. I mean, it's not really rocket science. You have basically three hazards with liquid nitrogen when you're running it. If you were running no insulation, you'd basically have three hazards. Well, actually, one of them is not a hazard, but like the thermal insulation stops the following three things. The first one is water buildup, because as you go below ambient temperature, you start condensing water out of the atmosphere and onto whatever cold surfaces you have. Now, if you're running LN2, the LN2 pot is very cold, so whatever condenses on that, it'll end up as ice. The back of the GPU core, unless you're running in like a relatively warm temperature range, should be a similar situation. This area should be covered in ice, not water. Unfortunately, the further away you get from the core, the less cooled those areas are, and you get water, because the LN2 pod is cooling the core, and the cold does travel through the PCB, because the PCB is copper and fiberglass, so mostly, it is thermally conductive, and so you get areas of the PCB which are not quite cold enough to build up ice, but are cold enough to build up a significant amount of water. And well, water, freshly condensed water is not conductive, but if you're running for extended periods of time, PCBs are pretty much just a whole, you have a whole bunch of exposed tin, because everybody uses lead-free solder on their PCBs, so that'll contaminate the water over time, and it'll steadily get more and more conductive, which can lead to things like random instability, failure to boot, failure to post, short circuits, and all kinds of other not really fun things. You gotta thermally insulate to prevent water buildup. Well, actually, water buildup you kind of prevent by making sure that there's no access to fresh air for the card, or that any water that does build up is absorbed by something like, say, a towel or blue shop towel. Now, the other thing with the water buildup is you'd also normally do a base layer of something like Vaseline, or in my case, Plastidip. Also, liquid electrical tape works, or basically you do a base layer of some kind of, conformal coat, artist's eraser, a whole bunch of options, really. And you do a base layer of that basically to prevent any water that does build up from actually making contact, electrical contact with anything on the PCB. But again, even if you liquid electrical tape everything or conformal coat everything, having water running around the board is not really an ideal situation anyway, and you'd rather avoid that. So you still need to do thermal insulation. Now, the other thing with the thermal insulation that it's for, you can't, the water thing is you can't conformal coat a PCIe slot, so, it's fine that the rest of your card isn't, is waterproof, but your PCIe slot isn't, so eventually you'll get signal corruption there, and you still can't run any benchmarks. But regardless of that, the thing about, so you have this water problem. Ice is not a problem. Ice buildup is just fine because ice isn't conductive. The problem is if there's certain areas of a card, like the VRM section on, say, VEGA is a actual massive issue with this, is if you're idling a VEGA card on liquid nitrogen at minus 90 degrees, the VRM will freeze over. The moment you go under load, the VRM will melt all that ice again, and you basically get a huge puddle right in the VRM area. So that's another sort of thing that you're insulating for, because you want to soak up that water and or prevent its buildup to start with. So that's one of the issues. The ice you don't really need to care about. The other issue is if you're benching architectures with no cold bug or no cold bug, oxygen has a higher boiling point than liquid nitrogen. So what ends up, if you have a LN2 pot that's sitting at, say, minus 196 internally, so the external walls might be at like minus 190, which is well below the boiling point for liquid oxygen. You can start building up liquid oxygen. And liquid oxygen is a freaking disaster, pretty much. It's extremely flammable. It turns anything that was kind of flammable before into, you know, very, very, very flammable. If it was flammable to start with, it is probably now approaching explosive levels of combustibility. So liquid oxygen is a huge pain. Luckily, you don't really need to worry about it because it doesn't build up in very large quantities, but it is a risk, and if you have no insulation at all, you can actually get it to build up on LN2 pots if you're running cold bug-free hardware. There's actually a video of Der Bauer demonstrating it where he gets the, well, liquid oxygen is a very pale blue, but you can't actually see that very well on the video, but what tells liquid oxygen, like what gives away liquid oxygen really easily is that it's actually polarized. So if you put a magnet near it, it'll actually get attracted towards the magnet. And there is a video by Der Bauer where he actually shows how he managed to build up liquid oxygen on a system with no thermal insulation at all. So that's another thing. If you're benching something that works at minus 190 or lower, you don't really want to, like, you wouldn't run it without any insulation because that is a real risk. And, you know, it can ruin your day. Now then, let's actually do the thermal insulation for this card. As I mentioned before, this doesn't have any waterproofing on it, so we're going to kind of go overboard with the toweling. Though I like to use the towels on the LN2 pot always, and there's kind of two reasons for this. Well, I don't know. I just don't like working with foam as much. For some reason, like, this stuff is, well, I have used Armaflex in the past, and basically the problem I see with Armaflex is that if you build up ice on the surface of any Armaflex, it'll just run down it. Another problem is LN2 pots are very, well, GPU pots especially, are kind of, you know, they're not a very regular shape. They're kind of hard to wrap up with like relatively hard, like Armaflex is not exactly the most what would you call it, moldable of materials. So I don't really like insulating with it because it's kind of a pain. What I've seen most people do with it for LN2 pots for GPUs is they actually tape it onto the LN2 pots, but like permanently stick it to them. But personally, I like the option of having the ability to just completely strip the LN2 pot of any insulation without having to worry about like glue or something hanging on it. Also, one thing to note, if you have a GPU with an LN2 pot attached, never ever place it LN2 pot up, because these things, well, okay, there are some LN2 pots that you could probably get away with if you did that, but something like this Raptor 4 here, this is multiple kilograms of copper. You put this LN2 pot upside, you know, upwards, it's gonna you can seriously damage the card. So yeah. Anyway, back to the towel. So A, I like that this absorbs water really well. B, it wraps around anything and everything, and it's great for filling out little nooks and crannies because, like, you can just shove it into places, right? You can just crush it up into whatever shape you need. Thermally insulating, it's, I think it's worse than Armaflex. Like, for a given thickness of Armaflex, this will actually be not, like, it won't protect, like, it won't stop ice buildup as well, but it does stop water better. And another thing is, I just like the look of this, because Armaflex just looks horrendous most of the time, especially if it starts getting worn out or something. It just looks absolutely god-awful. And towels are colorful, which, you know, it's just, yeah, completely superficial reasons, but I can also tell you that I've managed to, like recently what I did when I was benching the VEGA 64 here is I actually wanted to transition the card from the Z270 setup to X299 with the card cold, because I was like, oh, well, it's already like at minus 190. Might as well save some liquid nitrogen by not redoing everything on the card. And so I literally just grabbed the card out of the Z270 system, by the LN2 pot, because again, you don't want to grab the PCB because the PCB is not as strong as the LN2 pot is. And then I Well, I grabbed it through basically four layers of towel. LN2 pot was at minus 90. I was perfectly fine. So as far as the thermal insulating properties of this, Armaflex is probably better, but this works just fine. I've not had issues using it. So, yeah. Let's get wrapping. So I do 2 layers of towel for LN2 pots, and basically I just fold this first layer. This first layer, the goal is to cover up the base of the pot, which is why I have this fold down here. Actually, I think I've overdone it. Okay, so that's going to pack in nicely. That looks horrendous. Oh well, we'll tuck that in later. And there we go. Just grab those like that. Get a paper clip to hold them together. And just pull that down there. There we pretty much go. So that's the first towel I do. Then I get the second one, and I do this one as a triangle. And this one basically, so the interesting thing is this first one basically does most of the insulation for the bottom of the LN2 pot. The second one does sort of the upper part because it wraps around over the top. Because, yeah. So now we get this one. And this is exactly the same insulation setup I had on the VEGA 64 live stream. So if you're wondering if this works, well, it ran for multiple hours on a live stream just fine. So yeah, and as you can clearly see, that's how that kind of wraps around the card. And this is the finicky part. So there, so that now holds together, more or less. And we're gonna get the shoelace, which I don't know where it went. Oh man, where did that go? How does that disappear? It's a bright blue freaking... Where did I put it? It was here. It was literally right here. I'm not joking about this. I actually prepared my materials for the video. I just can't remember where I put them. Okay, well, that's admittedly not like great preparation, but come on. Okay, well, I have 2 of them, so there we go. So now what I do is to hold the bottom part of the towel, I start from the bottom, then go over the top, and I'll pick up the card after everything is fixed in place, because if I try to pick it up now and like show you around it, it'll end up screwing up the insulation. And then so there we go. And that actually looks like that worked out way better than I expected. So now I just tie that into a, the usual knot you would use for a shoelace. There, and now you can see that this is snug against the PCB right there. We still have enough clearance to actually insert the card into the PCIe slot because this all crushes. Basically, the only issue with this setup is that I get a bit of excessive ice buildup in this area, and a bit of same on the corners. The top side of the pot, this is all exposed, so that builds up ice as usual. And actually, where the shoelace goes around, there the insulation is really crushed, so you get a lot of ice in that area as well. But the rest of this is nice and loose, so basically what ends up happening is you have a massive air pocket under this, which insulates really well. So the rest of the towel never actually builds up a lot of ice on the loose parts. So yeah, and plus we don't care about the fact that like this area is pretty tight, because what you end up doing anyway is you put blue shop towel between your PCIe slots, which I now realize I should probably show you. So let me just turn off the Z270 system, pull the Fury out of it, and then we'll continue with this. That is turned off, right? Yeah, okay. Hop. There. Okay, so back to the card. Now we got to do the back of the card as well as the VRM area. So back of the card, we go blue shop towel, we go right over the core, and well, this will work. We can just have it go all the way to the back. There's not much really else to it. And then I'll do, basically I just do more and more strips of blue shop towel to cover up every single piece of the card. This PCIe slot area though, this place always bugs me. But luckily on VEGA, if you're benching like VEGA benches best at around, so far my experience has been like for GPU benchmarks, it works best around -70 because there's a little bit of a glitch with the HBM. And if you go below -70-ish, well, -75 is the minimum temperature for like 3D Mark benchmarks and like full 3D benchmarks that require memory performance. If you want to run things like GPU Pi, which are not very memory intensive, you can actually go all the way down to -130. And in that temperature range, the PCIe slot completely freezes over. So this ends up being ice very quickly, and I don't really worry about that too much. The main problem is the VRM section, because the VRM section, regardless of what temperature you're at, cycles between freezing and plus something, like positives. So it tends to build up ice at idle and then go full-on waterfall on you and under load. So yeah, I'll just go like that. And we're actually going to keep using the paper clip for the rest of this, basically. Also, you'll want to flick the BIOS switch before you finish off your insulation on a VEGA, because you won't be able, well, it'll be a pain to get to it afterwards. And that's something I keep forgetting to do in like the sessions I run, but yeah. You can only run the card so many times before you remember to do that. So now what I do is go nice and snug, and I take a bit of towel and just wrap it around the VRM section. And this makes me realize that, you know, it's really important to have on some, like, it's really handy that the VRM on VEGA is so massive overkill. Because if it wasn't, then when you do your ambient testing, I'd imagine the card wouldn't be too pleased with the fact that, you know, there's no VRM cooling in this condition. So, there. And then I just use a paper clip like that to hold that in place. Spread that area a bit, and then I do the same in that, for that area with another shop towel. So, let me just get one. And, this upper part is kinda not working out as well as I'd wanted to, but, well, now I could, again, you know, you could just go shoelace, but I kinda can't find that second one, so I'm just gonna go paper clip again, and I'm just gonna tweak this one up a bit so that it'll stay better. There. And that's basically the exact same insulation that you've seen that the card was running on the live stream that it was on, that I recently uploaded. This was basically what I did for the card. For the PCIe slot area, that all happens on the motherboard, basically. So let's go around. So yeah, and you can see how all the display stuff is completely covered. You don't actually need to worry about getting everything really, really flush. The main concern is that air cannot access the PCB, because after the ice builds up, like, once it freezes over once, or, you know, it gets absorbed into the shop towel, as long as no more fresh air can get to it, you won't really see more and more water build up over time. And actually, I'd like to tweak this bit that way. There. Ta-da! Yeah, and so the VRM is now covered, more or less. This is, okay, this is not as flush as I'd probably go for in reality, but this would work. This would probably run a few hours before you had real real problems. So really, depending on how much liquid nitrogen you have, this might be plenty. Now then, there's our Z270 system. And, well, let's finish off the PCIe slot section. So, blue shop towel, and we want to put it down in this valley here because that'll basically support the card a bit. Also, I would tape over this PCIe slot. So actually, let's do that. Where's electrical tape? There it is. Scissors. I used them earlier today, so they should be relatively easy to find. Indeed they are. Go. That's basically just to prevent water from getting into the PCIe slot. You don't need to be super neat with that because we're not trying to paint the board. So yeah, that's that area. Then I put blue shop towel in that. Okay, so there's that capacitor over there. I'm gonna stuff half of that in, fold that over it. This is actually a lot harder thanks to the camera being in the way. There. So that's nice. And yeah, that's pretty much basically what I would run. You know what? Actually no. I need to swap motherboards for the benching session I want to actually do, so. And unfortunately, I probably won't be live streaming that. Then, okay, this shop towel is a bit more beaten up than I'd like to use, but then I basically cover that area of the motherboard. This is why I don't like having the postcode in the lower area of the board, because, you know, if for some reason I was running multi-GPU, then, like, bye-bye bottom half of board, right? So, yeah. Putting postcodes in this area, like, putting anything in this area of the motherboard is just no. Just don't do that, because insulation. I tend to run insulation through there. So, yeah, and I'll just fold, well, whatever. The heatsink will be fine. You could also just fold it over into a square. And basically the goal with this second towel is just to cover the PCIe slots from, again, water getting onto them. The apex is plasti dipped, so, you know, it's not, won't necessarily care as much as, which one of these is the most beaten up? Ah, this one's going to work. It wouldn't necessarily care, like, well, I managed to run the K5 without any insulation, except a little bit of plasti dip around the PCIe slot, so let's get the card in. So basically all that blue shop towel and the towel on the LN2 pot is now going to support the card, and I can't actually see the PCIe slot, so bloody webcam. Sorry guys, I can't see what I'm doing, so there. And as you can see, that's very, very steady. It's not wobbling because we have plenty of support under the LN2 pot, so that it's not going to flex the PCB. You just need to check around the back. That is actually in the PCIe slot, because honestly, I can't see. So I'll move you around a bit. I did not plan for this part of the video, as you can probably tell. I mean, I evidently planned this whole video really badly. So there, now we're behind the board. And you can kind of see what's going on. And basically, even with the AIO, we're just going to cram some blue shop towel onto the PCIe slot and like use the VRM heatsink to keep it in place. There we go. And actually, we can just pile on some more at this point as well. So, okay, well, this is torn up. Whatever. There. And I'd actually run this. Like, this is actually basically exactly how I've run the card for the last few sessions I've done on it. That horrific monstrosity in front of you right now is basically how I've been running the VEGA 64 for the live streams, and all of the scores that I've posted on liquid nitrogen with the VEGA 64. This is the insulation that it was running. It works, well, it works. I've not honestly had an issue with it at all. as far as I'm concerned. Like, I've not had, well, I've not tried to, you know, ride the pot up and down in the temperatures too much. Like, I never brought the card above -40 once I got down to -70. I know when I was running a Fury X in the -40s range, eventually what ended up happening was the PCIe slot was basically a lake, and that stopped working. But this, for the low temperatures that I run on Vega, this worked perfect. Like, this worked fine for multiple hours. You know, it worked for the entire Vega 64 live stream. It worked for me when I was doing my own personal benching sessions, which was like, I don't know, that might have been 5 hours or something even, because that was pretty long. And yeah, this is how I wrap up my GPUs, and I basically just adapt this to every GPU depending on what GPU I'm running. So like on graphics cards where the VRM is further down the PCB, I wouldn't bother with this piece of towel because it's freaking VRM. Also, I'd plasti dip all the memory chips and that kind of thing. Actually, memory chips are probably the biggest concern, which I'm lucky that Vega has the HBM, because I think on a GDDR5 card, doing this would probably end up with water under the GDDR5 chips, and you'd have one of two scenarios. Memory overclocking doesn't work, or the card doesn't work at all. So one of those two would, like, massive instability, or basically card doesn't even post. But yeah, on Vega 64, I've just been running this, and it works great. On other cards, you know, plasti dip, and then this again, and you just adapt it to avoid whatever you need to avoid or cover whatever you need to cover. So that's it. Thanks to Alza for providing the GPU. They're a European e-tailer, I think's the word. So, you know, internet store, you can buy computer hardware from them, as well as liquid nitrogen cooling gear like thermal pastes, LN2 pots, not the one I use, but other ones, significantly cheaper ones than the one I use, which I've actually been meaning to try, though I don't think they actually fit on Vega. So, yeah, you'd need an adapter plate. What else is there? Well, just general computer hardware stuff, like they sell motherboards and RAM as well, of course they do. So, yeah, huge thanks to them for the card, and you should go check them out. And then the other thing is, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below or any questions. What else was there? Right, I have a PayPal, a Patreon. There's also shirts. You can find a link to all of those down in the description below. Thank you for watching. I hope this wasn't too bad. But, I mean, we literally just dressed up a GPU for... well, in a whole bunch of towel, basically, and, I mean, there's not really that much to it. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and see you next time.